In 1823, a French missionary wrote something controversial that the long standing missionary effort of converting native Hindus into Christianity in India had failed. Today we explore Letters on the State of Christianity in India by Jean Antoine Dubois, a book written from the heart of colonial India that shook missionary circles in Europe. This is a 200-year-old book which has full leather binding with gilt title and decoration to spine. Dubois was born in France in 1765 and came to India in 1792. He spent 32 years among the people of South India in Pondicherry, Mysore and beyond, learning their languages and customs, sometimes even adopting Indian dress to better connect with locals. After decades of missionary work in India, Dubois wrote the Letters on the State of Christianity in India to make a startling claim that under the conditions of the time, the conversion of Hindus as a nation was essentially impracticable. Dubois didn't just say the effort was failing, he explained why. But this was not the only reason why he wrote this book. In the second half, we find Dubois defending the Hindus against slandering remarks of a certain reverend that he doesn't explicitly call out but masks his name with asterisks. My research says that it could be Reverend Claudius Buchanan, an evangelical missionary for the Church Missionary Society. In Buchanan's Christian Researches in Asia, a book that shaped how Britain was taught to see India, he says, Hindus are immoral, ignorant, unchaste. They are wicked, barbaric, and savage, and many more such obnoxious remarks. With that background, let's look at the first reason why Dubois believed Hindus couldn't be converted to Christianity. Dubois says that Christianity was introduced in India in 1500s during Portuguese invasions. As a side note, I have made a detailed video on what was happening during that period in India, the first Englishman that came to the land and such, so feel free to check it out. Saint Francis Xavier was one of the most prominent missionaries of that time, who had made thousands of converts. The modus operandi of these missionaries was to introduce themselves as European Brahmins who have come to India for knowledge exchange with their Brahmin brothers of India. They would dress, eat, and behave like the locals to be more easily accepted into the society. A great example of this is Roberto de Nobili, an Italian missionary who dressed like a sannyasi, introduced himself as a Brahmin, learned Tamil, Sanskrit, the Vedas, and converted several nobles and scholars to Catholicism in India. Jesuits' tolerance of Hindu practices led to several complaints being made to the Vatican, with the fear that focus is more on their superstitions than on converting them. The Pope of that time, Benedict XIV, condemned all such superstitious practices. But this led to what the missionaries had anticipated. Many converts renounced Christianity and reverted to their original religion. Because it was never easy to convert Hindus. You can oppress them, tax them, or rob the lot, kidnap their wives and children, and they will perhaps surrender, but if you go against their religious or civil institutions, you will face pushback from them. Dubois claims that as long as the customs of the Hindus survive, it will be impossible to convert them. The Christian religion had never faced such hurdles anywhere in the world like it faced in India. There was a desperate struggle to overcome the stronghold that the Hindu priests had over the natives. The crafty Brahmin has created a sheath around the Hindus which protects them from foreign attacks. So until the polished part of the nation, the leaders, the Brahmins are impressed upon, there is no way Hindus can be converted to Christianity. The author, interestingly, describes who the kind of natives were to convert to Christianity. They were from the lowest tribes, outcasts, outlawed men, and have been ostracized from the society with no recourse but to embrace Christianity. Further, Most of them were born of a pagan, Moor, or a prostitute. They have a bad education with questionable morals. We do get to see some numbers that Dubois has shared to outline the number of converts in India at that time. For brevity, I will skip the specifics. What I would highlight though is Dubois' remark that it would be far easier for a Brahmin to convert certain sections of the European society into Shiva and Vishnu worshippers than for missionaries to convert Hindus into Christians. Startling, isn't it? Now, we move into the second argument of Dubois, which was that translating the Holy Scripture, Bible, into the vernaculars is not going to be helpful. It is because without preparing the Hindu mind for Bible, every account in the text is going to hurt their sentiments. For example, Abraham killing a calf for a feast will cause the Hindus to consider him as evil, since cows are considered sacred in Hinduism. How can a Hindu be convinced of a God that gets pleased with bloody sacrifices? They will relate such a God with mischievous Hindu deities like Kali and Yamraj, whose wrath can be appeased by bloodshed. Surely, this book must be a work of abomination, which talks of Solomon consecrating a temple by slaughtering 22,000 oxen. A Hindu is bound to think that such a religion has an impure source and its followers vilest of all. Dubois then suggested that the way to overcome these biases is by substituting a lamb for the calf in the vernacular translation of the Bible. Similarly, since intoxication is odious to the well-bred Hindu, grape juice can replace wine for the Eucharist in the Bible. In addition, the Tamil translation of the Bible would have such ridiculous expressions that it is impossible to read even 4 lines without laughing at it. Dubois recommends that in order to awaken the curiosity of the Hindus, the translation should be at the level of the Indian texts by including poetry in a flowery style and with eloquence. This clearly shows that the Indian literature was considered intellectual and of certain class. This ends our section on why Dubois believed that it was impossible to convert Hindus into Christianity. But before we move into the second section, which was about vindicating Hindu men and women, I want to highlight a small detail that I found in this book. And it is stuff like this which rare book collectors like myself find joy in. The word "of" was missing between spirit and profusion. So one of the previous owners wrote it with a pencil themselves. But look at the beautiful calligraphy here. This made me pause for a few seconds and contemplate on who the previous owner or owners of this book could have been. Anyway, moving on. The author begins his letter by stressing on the fact that the Europeans come to India with a heavy prejudice against the Hindus. Dubois continues his attack against the Europeans and questions their intentions behind supplying Hindus with Bible when they really ask for food and clothing. And it is not only India which is afflicted with hunger. Hundreds of thousands of pounds are wasted on distributing Bible, which could have been used for feeding the poor in England as well. Dubois then directs his frustration on all the crime like thievery, murder, prostitution, etc., which exists in major European cities like London and Paris, but is never talked about as much as those of the problems that exist in India. In terms of education and manners, the Hindu shines far above the European. Because the focus of the European almost always tends to getting drunk, whereas the mere proposal of intoxication is considered insulting by the Hindus. He then praises the trustworthiness of a Hindu by providing an example of how wealthy families would entrust their caretakers with all their assets and would always find everything intact after their return, even if several years have passed by. The author then goes on to finding similarities between Hinduism and certain sects of Christianity like jumpers, shakers, Methodists, Quakers, etc., in terms of the religious extravagance seen at Tirupati and Jagannath. Dubois ends his letters on the vindication of Hindu males by saying that they are hardworking, patient, and submissive people who are considerably high on the scale of civilization. They have made progress in astronomy, philosophy, ethics, etc. Dubois directly attacks the reverend's assertion that Hindu females were excluded from social engagements. He points that such restrictions had existed even in Spanish and Portuguese society, and it was only during the age of chivalry that the situation improved. And these improvements have nothing to do with Christianity. In reality, Hindu women enjoyed more freedom and had enviable privileges. They were responsible for the management of the entire household, charities, managing money, jewelry, valuables, and procuring spouses for their children. I find the next claim by the author amusing. But what's intriguing is the annotation for this that makes me believe that this book has been owned by not one but at least two different owners. Pretty cool, isn't it? Dubois then begins a long praise of the Hindu women by mentioning how sacred they are in the Hindu society and are addressed as Amma, or mother. They can easily visit crowded places, and unlike in Europe, men who gaze them are considered as uneducated. Like any typical Bollywood movie, men would face off any danger if the women of the household are offended in any manner. And it is incorrect to say that they are excluded from public assemblies. On the contrary, they are the leaders of most family ceremonies, religious festivals like Ugadi, Pongal, Mahanavami, etc. We now get an interesting insight into the different kinds of employment that Hindu women would partake in, such as agriculture, shopkeeping, accounting, since they are shrewder than men. They sell fish, betel, fruits, vegetables, sundry articles, and whatnot. They are so good in what they do that some women increase their capital to tenfold over a period of 10 years. So why did the Europeans really have a bad taste towards Hindu women? It is because all their knowledge comes from their criminal interactions with concubines, lacking any moral restraint, usually from the lowest tribes. Dubois now gets deeper into the controversial topic of sati. He acknowledges that this evil exists in the Hindu society, but the numbers are highly exaggerated. What warrants our attention is the argument he presents next. He asks passionately whether suicide is just limited to India, and is it not true that more people die by suicide and dueling in a month in France and England than during the whole year in India by sati? And like this, Dubois continues to attack many other exaggerated myths like polygamy. He says this practice is highly discouraged in India, especially by the Brahmins. The Rajputs even punished the adulterers by death. This was a lot of ground to cover. So Dubois ends his plight by saying that since the Reverend was determined to portray the Hindus in a bad light, he deliberately chose to overlook all this evidence and the social complexities that existed in India. When this book came out in 1823 in England, it caused a storm. Anglican ministers replied directly challenging Dubois' conclusions. James H. wrote a reply to the letters of the Abbé Dubois on the state of Christianity in India in the year 1824. Letters on the state of Christianity in India captures a moment when Europe tried to explain India, and one missionary had the courage to accept that he did not succeed. This book doesn't celebrate conversions. It records resistance, misunderstanding, and resilience. If you want to explore more books that explain India's past in unexpected ways, subscribe to my channel. And as always, stay curious.